The movies have been a vital part of culture for over 100 years. An art form, an experience, a medium that spoke to everyone. It was always part of our lives. Until one day, suddenly, it wasn't.
We are now effective today, requiring all counties to close their indoor activities, their indoor operations in the following sectors: restaurants, wineries, tasting rooms, movie theaters, family entertainment centers.
It was in March of the year 2020 when theaters were forced to close their doors indefinitely due to the meteoric rise in cases of the coronavirus, with absolutely no idea as to when they might be able to open up again.
Branson IMAX, this is Colton. How can I help you?
Branson's IMAX Entertainment Complex has been operating for 30 years.
We have a big screen. You know, it's 84 feet wide, 62 feet tall, big, giant IMAX screen. You know, they tout the biggest in the Midwest.
Each week, Hollywood movie releases are shown here on the big screen 6 times their normal size. Big screen, big sound, big difference.
In addition to the giant IMAX screen, the building has a 3-screen standard theater, a theater for live performances, a full-service restaurant,
we were shut
and
down
shopping.
For, what was it, 3 months, I think. And then once we opened back up, you know, obviously we were working with a limited capacity. You know, we had to, you know, socially distance people in the theater, make sure that everybody was following the rules. And, you know, at a limited capacity, you know, we weren't even using that limited capacity. There was really, we had the rule of, you know, we can only have this many people in the theater, but for the most part we didn't need it just because there weren't that many people getting out, because, you know, the fear of the pandemic was still so big that people just weren't getting out. So for the first, you know, few months in the middle of summer when we'd be doing 100, 150 people in every show, we would get 5 people in a show, 10 people in a show, sometimes no people in a show. It just happens. The most difficult part of people was getting people to wear a mask. You know, the city of Branson passed the mask mandate, and people who think themselves smarter than the people that know better think, oh, I don't need to wear a mask. You know, it doesn't matter if I wear a mask. Well, the leading sign says, oh, it's probably, you know, helps to reduce your chances to wear a mask. You should probably wear a mask. I mean, literally the first day we had the mask mandate, it took all of an hour for somebody to call me a Nazi for asking them to wear a mask before they walked in the theater. People just being rude and just overall showing their worst possible selves. Just make things more difficult than they need to be. You know, there were obviously, you know, a lot of people that weren't that way and were, you know, oh yeah, of course, you know, sorry, I forgot. In which case, you know, we offer them a complimentary mask, and they go on their way. So, honestly, you know, after a few months, things did pick up a little bit. I felt like it felt like during the fall time when we would start to pick up with more of a bus season, which we didn't obviously have because buses, you're not going to do that in a pandemic. But yeah, we started to pick up a little bit. And I think as the pandemic wore on, either a mix between people were just tired of staying at home, or people didn't care anymore, or people felt safer, things started to get pushed back. And a lot of it was just the uncertainty, you know, like, oh, these movies are getting back. Are we going to even be able to be open? And that was before, you know, we had even shut down. You know, are there going to be any movies to watch? You know, and for a long time there wasn't. Thankfully, we were in a good position where, you know, we're a tourist town, and so we're going to have people here regardless of whether there's a pandemic or not, because, like I said, there's going to be the people that don't care, or the people that are, you know, just sick of being home. They need to get out a little bit. And we tried to offer them a fun, safe option. So, we brought back all those old movies. Really loved having Space Jam, especially back, was really fun, because I loved Space Jam as a kid. Like Ferris Bueller we brought back. We brought back all the old Batman trilogy, the Christopher Nolan ones. And those were hit or miss. Sometimes we would get a bunch of people for those, sometimes we wouldn't. But yeah, definitely the uncertainty, because I think this 2020 there was a year there was going to be a lot of really big movies coming out, and a lot of us, because we're all, we're both big movie fans. Everyone that works here is a big movie fan. That's just one of the perks of working here, is we get to go see movies. And so, we were all really excited for these things, and they just kept getting pushed back and back. And, we were disappointed as movie fans, because we wanted to go see them. And we weren't sure what was happening, because these movies keep pushing back. Do we have a job? Like, are we going to have a job to come back even when they do decide to come out? And even now to this point, movies are still being shuffled around a little bit, and we're kind of getting a mix of movies that were, ready to be put out in 2020. We're getting a mix of movies that were supposed to be put out now. And so, yeah, it's definitely been really interesting to navigate how those work and figure out when they're going to come out. When it came to Wonder Woman, I felt like they made that decision of really last minute. We still weren't sure, are they going to have it out on Christmas? Are they not going to have it out on Christmas? Christmas is the biggest day in movie theaters of the year. And so we're wondering whether we're going to be open. Are we going to get the day off? It would have been really nice, but, those things happen. But yeah, it was interesting, because, with the, HBO Max and the dual streaming, and like Mulan that got the premiere access on Disney Plus, and it didn't even release in theaters. That's the thing. Wonder Woman did release in theaters, but like Mulan would have been, in a non-pandemic year, that would have been one of our biggest movies of the year, and we didn't get that. We didn't get to see any of it. So definitely difficult. A lot of uncertainty from the aspect of being a fan of movies and wanting to see the movies that come out, and just job security.
The owners of Branson's IMAX also own an 11-screen multiplex on the other side of town, and it remained closed for over 2 years after the pandemic began.
I'm Taven Willard. I've been the general manager here at Branson Meadows Cinema since we reopened about a month ago. It was closed for a long time due to COVID, so we took it as an opportunity. Obviously, we've done a lot of remodeling, so there was a lot of hard labor that went into it, just the remodeling process. It looks like a completely different theater, so that's what it was like. I did a lot of painting. A lot of installing seats, a lot of hanging new screens.
You guys just kind of want to follow us and look around. In here, this is the lobby, right? We've got a brand new floor. We've got a brand new ceiling, and we've got brand new walls, pretty much. We have an all-new drink station. I know, and it is going to be self-serve, so you don't have to wait in line to get your refills. Once you have your cup, you're good to go, and you maybe can have this cup. This is the cup that we are giving away starting tomorrow at 2:30, and it is free refills for the entire year.
Free refills for the entire year, every time you purchase a ticket. So we're spraying down all the seats with antibacterial that kills coronavirus at the end of every day. Same thing with our sanitizing wipes up by the food stations, just taking that an extra step. We go through anything that anyone could touch, even the walls, making sure handrails, those get wiped down daily and stuff like that. Just because it seems like there's a new outbreak every other month, so to make sure it doesn't get here.
But the first
showing of Doctor Strange is going to be in this theater, so be sure and be here for that. Everyone that came back to the theater opening day, we had a line around the theater, just waiting to get back in, so excited that we were open. It's an experience going to the movies, it's not just the movie you're watching. Those are the people that really understand. There are also other people that are more comfortable at home, so sure, whereas those people might have came out to the theater before, they might choose to stay home and stream it now, but you're not going to get the movie theater experience at home. So at my theater, for sure, the experience is there. We're making sure, like I said, taking those extra cleaning steps so that we can do everything just the way we used to, everything else, with concessions, popcorn, having conversations with the guests and stuff like that, just keeping the place clean and safe for that environment. As far as the experience being restored, yes. As far as competing with streaming or people coming out for that experience, we have 5 movies in right now that are streaming and have been for weeks, and we'll keep playing them because people want to come to the theater to see them.
The struggles of large theater chains have been heavily publicized, but smaller operations, like this beloved nonprofit theater, face challenges you may not have heard about.
So we were closed for 159 days, March 16th. We closed before the city required it. And it seemed like at that time the safest thing to do for the community. So after closing, we kind of had to scramble to figure out how to stay afloat and how to keep people on staff if possible. And we kept people on staff for another paid day. And then it seemed to make more sense to let people go because of the relief package that went through at the federal level. They were going to get some good unemployment benefits. And I was on full time, kind of just keeping things, checking in on the building itself, trying to figure out what a reopening would look like, and in the meantime, trying additional funding, whether it was, grants. The Springfield Regional Arts Council had a grant that we applied for and received. The Small Business Association, as part of that relief package, also had SBA loans that are easily forgivable, and the PPP loans were also something that we participated in. So all of that really, really helped us to keep going until we felt like we kind of had a game plan in place for reopening as safely as we could. That whole time, of course, we were still doing membership pushes. We had a lot of great support from bigger donors that kind of stepped up and really have helped us weather what is by far the worst year of ticket sales we've had, even when we were a one-screen theater.
Not all chains had the same experience. This Missouri-bred exhibitor with over 50 locations stayed stronger than most during the pandemic.
First of all, I don't think anybody could have anticipated, certainly, the significance of the impact it would have on the industry and the duration of that effect. And so, B&B we've been family owned and operated since 1924, owned by the same couple of families, the Bagby and Bills families is what B&B means. And they've operated with, I would say, fiscal conservatism. They've always been ready for a rainy day, always had some safety nets in the event that there would be an unanticipated closure. But man, there was no way that we could possibly have anticipated, months of having our buildings essentially out of operation. And really the challenge that we were facing It certainly had to do with the health crisis, but then it was compounded by the fact that the studios were then reluctant to release new content. And so even as our buildings were allowed to be opened in various counties and across the various states in which we operate, we still didn't have anything to put on screen. And so we had to kind of think on our feet and devise ways to remain solvent. We did some curbside popcorn, curbside concessions at a number of our locations. We developed theater rental opportunities for some classic films or some retro titles, so you could come in with 25 people for $100 and watch a movie. If there was a film that the studio would give us, we got behind it. And then a lot of it.
The town of Lamar, Missouri is served by a historic theater called the Plaza and a drive-in called the Barco. These twin operations are independently owned and relied on community support to stay afloat.
March 17th is when we shut down. It was just pretty much a have-to thing. All the theaters were closing at the time, and we just felt like it was the right way to go. Last summer, the ticket sales in here were not good at all. Even our summer vacation movie kids series that we do was considerably down, and it was free. This time, with everything that's been happening, it's probably been a blessing that we didn't have many more screens, because it's been hard enough to fill seats in the one that we have. This pandemic has shut some of them down permanently. And that's the worst thing of.
And everyone has their own road as to how the pandemic treated them. But essentially, I was in prep on a project right up to the pandemic. I had finished shooting something in about end of January. I started in February prepping my next project, which was the David O. Russell Untitled project. And we were between Boston and LA, and we were about maybe 7 weeks out. It was a little bit before the whole, government shutdown, but essentially the industry was like, okay, flights are starting to be shut down, international travel is shut down, and the studio was like, all right, we're going to go on a 2-week pause to see what's happening here, right? So this was probably early March. I don't know all the dates as to when exactly the official lockdown began. So essentially I went home to my house in Pennsylvania, keeping in touch with everyone, thinking that, like everyone else, this would maybe be 2-3 weeks. We'd regroup and then come back. Obviously, that was not the case. Everyone was kind of chasing the idea of where would open up first and where could you shoot, right? So was it Europe? Could we make this movie in Europe? Could we make it in Australia? So during the pandemic, personally, I was still somewhat attached to the project. Once again, nobody really having an end zone as to when this was going to end or someone was going to call it off. We were just kind of rolling, with it to try and figure out how to mount the project. I was lucky enough to be on something that didn't just get canceled, that tried to stick to its guns, and then was able to, spend a lot of time with my family during the pandemic, which is what all filmmakers did, and then, find a solution as to where to shoot the project once, all systems would go.
How did it affect me pragmatically and practically speaking, but also, there's like the meta, I was home for so long, which I had never been, I realized that I had never been home that long since before either of my kids were born, and so I was able to spend so much more time with them And that has its own kind of, that's definitely a mind fuck. And then you start having moments of like, what am I doing with my life? Like, I need to figure out ways to be home. And so I think there's definitely a silver lining to it all that I haven't fully wrapped my head around yet. Doing The Old Man, a show for FX and Hulu, and that we were, scheduled to finish sometime in May. I think we were actually going to go to Morocco. And, once COVID hit around March, it just seemed like it ground to a halt. At first, because no one really had any idea. And I think that's what was interesting about the pandemic is that, starting in February, it was this weird, ominous thing that was happening, and people thought it was going to blow over in a couple weeks, or they didn't really know how to plan. So our first thing was like, okay, we're just going to shut down for a week. Well, everyone's coming back. Don't worry, we're going to come back in a week and continue on, and we'll all go to Morocco as planned. And then 1 week turned into 2 weeks. And then we were just going to go to Morocco because it seemed like things were maybe better there. And then, sure as shit, it just got worse and worse and worse. And then they just pulled the plug. And I didn't really work then from March until end of September. So, there was definitely a few months there was like no one had any idea if this was what was going to happen.
I was very lucky in the sense the pandemic hit just when our hiatus between seasons for The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel was happening. And, we were delayed just a little bit, but not seriously. So I had not expected to work during that period because I was working on a personal project on the side. So it didn't affect me too much. But if it had gone on for, a few more months, I think it would have started to have a bigger impact on me.
Let's see, 12-Hour Shift got into Tribeca Film Fest. It was in competition at Tribeca. And days before we were going to go to Tribeca, the pandemic hit. So 12-Hour Shift was deeply affected by the pandemic, but we ended up releasing in the October of 2020 in drive-in theaters and online, and it did really well for us. So I would say that 12-Hour Shift was definitely a benefactor in that pandemic chaos, because big theater or big movies were like, we're not putting anything out. And we were like, we'll put this out. And we just hit that right time where drive-in, we're like, give us something. And we're like, we've got the perfect movie for you. So I would say we benefited from that. But at the same time, we were about to film Ghosts of the Ozarks. And I was building the town. It took 9 months to kind of build that town. And during the middle of it, the pandemic hit. And so I ended up having to build that town with like 4 people instead of a big crew coming in at the end. So we definitely got hit hard with that, and we got shut down. So I reached out to SAG because we still needed to film the film. And I had a long meeting with a bunch of them, and we ended up being like one of the first productions up and running during the pandemic with SAG approval, and we were the first to finish without any cases. Our team did such a great job in July of 2020 shooting this thing. So we shot Ghost. So we were deeply affected both times by the pandemic. But you just can't quit. You just got to keep going. So now we look back and during the pandemic, we released 2 films in theaters, 12-Hour Shift in drive-ins, and Ghost in Alamo Draft Houses, and we're coming out with Squirrel. So it's one of those things where like we were lucky because we were a small enough team that we finished Ghost in post by ourselves when most companies had to kind of shut down because nobody was working. So deeply affected, but we did our best to just continue and keep making.
But when the pandemic started last year in March, I was working on a Netflix TV show that takes place in the 80s about children and a monster. And that show was just shooting part of their season here, and it got shut down by the pandemic. And then we tried to come back on that show, and they decided it wasn't really going to work for the time they had. So finally they decided once they're done in the other place that they shoot, they'll come back. And through all of that, ends up that I'm probably not going to get to work on it anymore because it pushed so far. Zero, shush! That show got delayed on us, and we're not sure exactly when that's going to start, so I've had to take another thing in between. With that, and this is just to me, it doesn't happen to everyone, but in early December, I had a stroke and had to have emergency brain surgery. So there are other shows that I would have taken, but I haven't been able to because getting back on the horse, so to speak, after having your brain cut open and operated on for 4 hours is an interesting prospect. That's separate from the pandemic, but it also has happened.
So, at the beginning of the pandemic, I work in theater, and I had a play that was about to have a world premiere. I was also directing it. So we were about 3 days away from rehearsal, and we were ready to go, and then the pandemic hit and the play was canceled. So all that work of 5-6 years trying to get to that point in that process was canceled. I was about to go to Nova Scotia to direct another show that summer. That also got canceled. I was about to play the Wicked Witch of the West in Wizard of Oz, and that got canceled. And then, I got pretty depressed in the summer. And then films started going in the fall of 2020. So I did a couple of movies there in the fall. And then our province's numbers were too high, so they canceled the film industry. They stopped all films from coming here, and now we're just picking back up again. So it's been a very depressing and disappointing year that has, yes, directly affected my employment and my soul.
Just doing some short films, things with kind of close friends and long-term team members, but those all got immediately delayed. At the time, most of my work was centered in development, story analyst work, script reviews, screenwriting itself. And that all was able to plug along well enough during the pandemic because most of that's done remotely anyways. But the production side of things, even though that was mostly casual, more hobby related, that did hit a huge halt.
I've been one of the fortunate ones that the projects I was on before the pandemic were at a stage in post-production where they could basically continue. They were delayed a bit, they were stretched out a bit, but I've basically been working consistently through the pandemic, which I'm really grateful for. And as it happens, just as those projects are wrapping up, there's a whole new slate of projects that are starting up with the loosening of restrictions around the pandemic. But I know a lot of really wonderful composers whose projects were not in a place where they could get into post and have not been working as much. So I think it's very haphazard as far as who's been working and who hasn't.
At the time that the pandemic hit, I was working with a nonprofit, and that position didn't work out past the early pandemic months. So I was unemployed, and I was gratefully unemployed and safe, and I had my home, and I was navigating some personal life transitions with my toddler, and it was the time to really get clear about how my life was going to be sustainable and happy and fulfilling and successful monetarily as a single parent. And I said, well, this is the time to up my portfolio. This is the time for me to show what my interest is in entertainment in a much bigger way. So my goal was, I am only going to be writing from now on. I'm only going to be paid as a writer. And I did, conclude that year with a lot of great networks and 2 offers. And now I am a full-time freelancer writer, and I write for Collider. I write TV features for Collider, also on film, and I am a senior writer for a tech company overseas. So I'm back on my feet. So that's my unemployment pandemic story, is that, I'm back on my feet, after a year, and, well into my new life now, working again.
A lot of other things have changed that before the pandemic hit. I think the pandemic is perhaps the nail in the coffin in a way, but I think television and streamers have a lot more to answer for in terms of taking people away from the cinemas. Then pandemic is getting blamed a lot for at the moment,
2020 saw the surprising revival of an obsolete experience. The pandemic brought back the drive-in, but is it viable in the long term as an alternative to theaters?
We were one of the first films during the pandemic to be played at a drive-in theater. We had 12-hour shifts release at the drive-in. I think it was the same weekend that Unhinged came out, which was like the first success for a film after COVID, because it got released in drive-ins and it did really well online. So we went to the drive-in a couple times to see our films there, and it's a great experience. It's really hard because you can't so much of a film is sound. So much of a film is that feeling that you get. And if you have a great car, you're going to feel that to some degree, but drive-ins are an experience. They're not really for the filmmaker.
I went to a lot of drive-ins through the pandemic. I got my fix that way. And some of the best memories I have of, not just this year, but any time recent past, was these drive-ins, going there, and, there was still mask safety, but you could sit in the back of your truck. I would pull my truck backwards, and my girlfriend and I would use our masks, and people are still distancing, but, you get in your truck and you stay to yourself. And we had a radio kind of helping us with the broadcast of the audio, so we could hear it from there. Still a very good community experience. Most of the drive-ins that were happening during this time were pop-ups, so they weren't getting that kind of movie theater content as much. There's always the drive-ins, that brick and mortar drive-ins, that were there forever. But the majority of the ones I went to were pop-ups. There was a huge resurgence of pop-ups. And they were mostly showing older films, classic films from the 80s, 90s, things like that. So it's difficult for me to judge that, because I didn't get a good feel of how easily some of these drive-ins could get modern content, and I think the modern spectacle content is what drives the theater experience. But the community experience is certainly there. And I think if there could be more drive-in films, and they could get, if there was a big budget blockbuster or an award season anticipated movie releasing simultaneously in theaters and drive-ins everywhere, I would easily pick the drive-in on a warm summer night over the movie theater.
I think it's great. And yes, I understand the resurgence during the pandemic. It's really smart. I mean, I remember in the early days of the pandemic, a friend asking me, well, do you feel safe going out in your car? I was like, are you kidding me? That's the only place I feel safe in right now. Socially distance, check. Being able to be with other people in, community around watching a film, check. Big screen that makes you feel like you're in a movie theater, but you're not, you're outside, check. So I think it's great.
In Montrose, Colorado, where my wife's grandmother lives, they still have a drive-in, and we always go every time we're there, especially so the kids can experience what a drive-in's like. This is what a drive-in was. I don't think we have to worry about that so much anymore. If they're gonna keep doing it at the Bloom Fiesta Park here, they still have they're doing drive-ins all the time. I don't know if it'll go away again. It's so easy now and cheap with digital projectors, and you can set up a screen for nothing. It used to be more expensive, and there's a lot of places that just have these empty spaces, like the fairgrounds here, or like the Bloom Fiesta Park here, that sit empty most of the year. Why not just have a screen set up for nothing and show a movie on a couple nights a week? it works. You know, it's easy, it's cheap to set up, and you can make more money that way. People like it. Why not?
When I was a kid, when I was in high school, we used to always go to the drive-in, and it was always a really fun social occasion. I think you spend less time focused on the movie, and the quality of the movie isn't as good, and there's just many factors. But the experience of going to the drive-in was wonderful, and I was able to do that a few times with my son this year, and it was great. I don't know, it's a whole nother experience. But if it's quality you're looking for, you just don't get it at a drive-in. You don't get, the sound is usually coming through the speaker in your car, and if you have a good speaker, then it's great, and if not, it's not that good. There's people walking around in front of you. Here in Manitoba, in the summer, it doesn't get dark till probably 11 o'clock at night, so the movies start in the full daylight.
During the pandemic, this is probably October-ish. My family came down from Oregon, and they were visiting while I was working in LA, and we couldn't go to a theater anywhere, but we're like looking for something to do with the kids. And because of COVID, all of these pop-up drive-ins had started. And I was like, man, like, how funny is that? Like, 40 years ago, it was like, LA was like the mecca of drive-in. Like, I remember going to drive-ins, seeing Batman and Star Wars and all this great, and the quality was terrible and the sound was terrible, but, like, it was such an event for our family to do that. And I was like, oh, wow, how crazy is that? Like, drive-ins going to come back, and drive-ins are, like, the perfect thing right now because no one wants to, like, be in each other's space. You can be in your little bubble, you can be in your car. Everyone's got super nice stereos in their cars now, so that part's been fixed. And, like, it was really sweet. I don't remember what we thought, some Pixar thing. But it was great. And my kids had never done a drive-in, and they were thrilled, and it was super fun for them.
The pandemic, a lot of people seem to think that drive-ins are doing great during the pandemic. It's a wonderful time. Drive-ins no, they're not. We're doing better than indoor theaters. We're doing better than a lot of restaurants. But we are not doing as well as we would have been before the pandemic. We don't have movies. In this business, you can play old movies occasionally and you can get by with it, and in the summer it works fine. It doesn't work in January. You could be as safe as you wanted to be here. You could stay totally by yourself. You didn't have to ever have any interaction with anybody.
Good evening, folks, and a hearty welcome to our drive-in theater.
We were making sure they stayed distant from each other. Our poles are designed that 2 cars can sit between each pole, and we just went down to 1 only between each pole. That way there was more social distancing, and we had them, the restrooms, we had them just take turns as far as, one at a time in there. And the snack bar, we tried to keep just 2 or 3 people in there at a time instead of a crowd of people.
Our big thing was making sure that the cars were not parking too close together.
We were doing really well, but we started later than normal because of the pandemic. And then when the projector broke, we were down 4 weeks of the peak part of the summer. So it definitely dropped us as far as attendance compared to last year. And then only being able to play mostly retro, which actually worked out all right. We had some good weekends, but the first major new release we had out there we had Trolls World Tour. It did phenomenal. That was actually our biggest movie of the summer. And then we brought back Twister and played it, and it was our second biggest weekend during the summer. And then surprisingly, our biggest weekend of the year was in October, and that was with Hocus Pocus. And actually, that was one of our biggest weekends in October we've had. And the whole month of October, we played Hocus Pocus out there. And it did surprisingly really, really well.
We closed down for 3 weeks last April, not knowing where all of this was headed like everybody else was. I think there was a time in early spring when we thought that by May we'll be done with this. It'll be over and everything will be getting back to normal, and it'll die out. Not everything that comes out of this pandemic is going to be bad. There's a lot of bad stuff. there's going to be a lot of changes in the way we do business, and I'm talking about we as a country in a lot of different industries that we have figured out we can do things differently, and it works. So, we'll see.
It was a good year, especially since, that's the drive-ins were the thing to go to this year because of the pandemic. I mean, there was a lot of people that we saw for the first time this year. So I mean, and hopefully they come back.
And now, folks, it's time to say goodnight. We sincerely appreciate your patronage and hope we've succeeded in bringing you an enjoyable evening of entertainment. Please drive home carefully and come back again soon. Good night.
The invention of television nearly a century ago was an unprecedented moment in history. Aside from being a landmark of technological advancement, it was the first real threat to the movies.
They made television to fit this really weird format where every 15 minutes you're going to be sold something. Which is kind of crazy that it worked.
To reach us when we're eager to watch and listen. It's a whole new concept in television, yet the technology is already proven.
Although home video formats have consistently changed,
have you felt it? DVD.
The experience stayed largely the same. But streaming is different. Why?
Hulu beams TV directly to your portable computing devices.
So they made this storytelling medium that, is episodic, and episodic storytelling goes back to, Dickens told stories episodically, but, they act like they made these act breaks to say, we got to hit this point right before a commercial and pick up here. Like, they made a way to tell a story specifically around
relax, look at this,
selling toothpaste, and that's wild. So now that they don't have to sell the toothpaste, because what they're selling is content, that's what the streaming services are for. There's no ad needed. You subscribe because you want what they have. I don't know, it's different. It's a whole different world.
Well, so I'll preface this. So I guess this was maybe the summer before last, so well before COVID and the end of cinema as we know it. But I was asked to go do a Disney Plus feature. Cool up and coming director, funny script. By and large, something I probably should have taken. But at the time, my ego filmmaker brain was like, this is a streaming only movie. This is just so Disney can launch Disney Plus with a wall of fucking titles when you all log onto their website. Like, it's just going to be lost. Like, no one's going to care about this movie. It's not going to get the same. I think that, one of the things, and this still affects, I think, a lot of filmmaker ego, especially in a city like LA or New York. It's when I'm in a car stuck in traffic and I see a billboard for something, for usually a movie or a TV show, that has probably more weight than it should. It's like, oh man, like, they're putting resources behind this. Like, somebody believes in this project. Those aren't cheap. Those ads aren't cheap. All these campaigns. I mean, sometimes they're spending just as much on an ad campaign for a show as they are on the show. They weren't promoting, oh, this is going to be on streaming. They're like, this thing's at theaters. blah on September 12th. You know, like you have to be there. And there's the trailers playing on TV. Like it's a thing, and you're like, oh shit, like yeah, I'm a part of something cool. Like whereas the idea of making a movie, going through all of that work and that emotional rigmarole and putting your 110% into something, knowing that it's not going to get really any media buys, it's just going to like get its little poster on a big wall of titles on Disney Plus's website. Like, yeah, the ego's like, ugh, like that's not cool. Like, what am I like? This is not epic. This is not like celebrating the work. Truth be told, those movies that were on that landing page when Disney Plus started and 1 billion people signed up, probably more people saw that movie in the opening weekend than all my other movies probably put together, because of the convenience, because everyone's at home waiting for something to watch because COVID happened and no one can go out and do anything.
Well, as long as the films get made, and those films had substantial budgets, so it's not like being produced by Netflix hurt them financially by any means. As long as those films are getting made and getting shown, I'm happy. I don't, you know, whether it's a conventional studio distributing them or Netflix or Amazon Prime or one of the new streaming services funding them and making them, doesn't ultimately matter to me. I think as long as these directors get their funding and get a chance to express themselves and get it out there to an audience, and that's a good thing. I still ultimately feel like even with dramas, that you pay attention more when you paid the money to sit in the theater and you watch it. You don't have the option of putting it on pause and coming back later to it. So I feel my concentration is more focused when I see a movie in a theater.
When theaters closed, Universal experimented and released a Trolls sequel on demand. It made more money in 3 weeks without theaters than the original did in its entire theatrical run.
Then I think Trolls 2 is going to be the way stuff happens, and it just comes straight out to the thing, and only the theaters that have a more interesting niche are going to survive. Well, it's expensive. It's one of the biggest hard parts of a theater. So if you want to see a movie in the best sound with the biggest screen, you're paying, I mean, and this is here in New Mexico, and California it's way more, but if you're paying like $15 a ticket for a regular family, that's a lot of money. Whereas when they put out one of those Disney movies, Mulan maybe, you had to pay like $20 and the whole family could just sit and watch it at home. You could pop your own popcorn, and that's what you're battling against, you know. That's why you've got to get into a more community aspect, because if it's just me and my family, I'm not really concerned about the other 500 people in that room. It's really way too expensive. But if I can take, you know, the wife and kids, I mean, I remember taking everybody to see the last Star Wars. It was hundreds of dollars to get everybody there. Everybody have tickets, try to get a group together, because, again, I'm big about community. So I wanted as many of our friends and family to be with us watching the movie at the same time, so everybody can talk about it after. But you also are spending another $50, $75 on popcorn and stuff, because the kids want that part of it. That's part of their theater experience, you know. It's too expensive. It comes down to that always. They need to have the snacks be less expensive and have the movie itself be less expensive. It's just it's too much for most families, and especially right now, it's really rough on people. I mean, who has the money? If you're already paying $20 a month for Netflix, and then another, 15 or something for HBO Max, $100 a year for Disney Plus, $100 a year for Amazon Prime, you know, taking everybody to the movies is a real drain. It's got to be a super special occasion.
Oh yeah, concessions is everything. people compare it to an airport. Like, these are airport prices. And it makes me wonder how much money they make off, like, the airplane ticket. You look at how much money it takes to make a movie, and it makes sense that they're charging, $10 to see it. When VHS first came out, the tapes, I think they were like $100. The idea behind it being that 10 people could watch this movie, so that should be, or 100 people could watch this movie, so it should be the price of 100 movie tickets back then. A lot of money goes into making the movies, so, and you look at box office reports, they're talking about, the hundreds of millions of dollars these movies are making, but they cost hundreds of millions of dollars to make, so the ticket money goes right back into it. Concessions, we're looking at, like, we try to keep it at least 30%, 40% gross profit on everything. So it means whatever we order, we up the price 30 to 40%, but it's to keep paying people that work at theaters, so a lot of kids, their first high school job, and, people that love the theater like I do and want to make a career out of it. It's to keep paying them minimum wage, It's to keep up with that, for sure. So, buy concessions.
I think some people know this. I think a lot of people don't know this. We get some people that come in and they grumble at the fact that our popcorn is $8 or whatever. The issue is, for one, the way supply and demand and market works. Why do we charge $8? Because people are willing to pay $8 to buy movie theater popcorn. The other thing is, we have to inflate the price of popcorn, as is every single movie theater in the world. We don't make a lot of money on ticket sales. They come up with a set price. The studio gets a such percentage, we get to keep such percentage, and we're always on the lower end of that percentage of movie tickets. And so the only way that we can make money is we have to have a concession stand, and they have to cost more than it would cost to make it. That's the same as every restaurant in the world. You pay more for your steak than the steak actually costs. That's how a company makes money. And at the end of the day, we're a company, so we have to try to make money in any way that we can. So yeah, popcorn costs a little more. A soda is going to cost more here than it does in McDonald's. But once again, I think you're paying for the entire experience. You're going to see it on a big screen. With hopefully one day again, you're seeing it with 300 other huge fans of whatever movie you're coming to see in a theater. And so I think that comes into it a lot as well.
In theaters and streaming exclusively on HBO Max. The exact same day.
I was so hyped when it first happened. I was like, yes, okay, I'm still getting my movies. I was worried about that whenever this started. And then, like everyone else, I think 2 months in, I was like, I gotta get out of my house. I can't do this anymore. So it was a double-bladed sword for sure. It seems like it's staying that way now. Everything's going to a stream release, Paramount Plus, HBO Max, Netflix, Amazon. They keep releasing newer and newer, so beating DVD and stuff like that. Movies are out a month or so, and then they're straight to streaming. So
I don't know any of the inner workings of HBO Max and Warner Brothers and how money is divided up on a streaming service per view or however it might be. And so I get where they're coming from, where it's more difficult for them to potentially see money, or for their movie to make money or to be considered successful, so they can feel good about themselves and get their Oscar nominations or whatever it might be that they're looking to do with making a movie.
They were sitting on projects that could make them money, and the longer they sat on projects that could make them money, they're losing money. Also, their long-term slates were getting pushed further and further back the more they sat on them. They needed some reliable way to release these. It was a great cross-promotion with their streaming service. It did wonders for launching HBO Max.
I was excited at first, and then I missed my movie theater experience, walking in and smelling the popcorn. And then there's that guy that I know by first name, and we got to talk about the next Marvel movie every time I go in. And so I did miss that, and I'm happy that we can all enjoy that again.
I think it was very much a product and a necessity of the moment. I was okay with it. I thought it was exciting to get some movie, spectacle experience at the house for not being able to go to a theater. Disney Plus did some pretty good numbers with, they had a very trackable system where they were straight up charging extra for each of their premium releases. So they were able to kind of track theirs more in terms of how much it was making them. And they made surprising amounts of money, even with films people thought might underperform, like Mulan. But I think, starting with Black Widow, like I said, it's going to really start to tip the scales where they're going to be like, oh, we're surprised how many people are choosing theater over home for a film like this. And then I think the desire to support that business model is slowly going to go away. It's already going away, but I think it'll go away faster, I guess. So.
As far as understanding consumers, it meant, well, how can we still get our products to people? And, the movie industry was no exception to that.
But, at least, during the pandemic, Disney Plus was suited beforehand to kind of speed up. Disney controls a lot of the IP that, that people like to watch. So the streaming Disney Plus seemed like a incredibly smart business decision for them that, they took several years to try and bring out the platform in the right way. So streaming is here to stay. Streaming is only going to grow.
I think that you could even say they got cocky, where this gave them an excuse to test out some business models without theaters, because, there is that resentment of, theaters, collect this amount of money, we could collect it all and stuff. But I don't think that just streaming services can fill the void of what theaters do. But I do think there's conflict between theaters and studios, and I think it came to a head during the pandemic. And the studio was feeling like they could exist without theaters, and they tried some stuff out, and they did pretty good, but nowhere near, like the money they were getting off huge, heavily hyped and marketed theater releases. Nowhere near that. It mostly succeeded in launching HBO Max's HBO Max, the platform. It succeeded in driving some revenue to Disney. Did it do anything like industry breaking and spectacular? No, I think it was very much a placeholder, but I think at the beginning of it, the studios were thinking this was the beginning of something like theaters are gone, was their thinking, like we can just release our own content, distribute on our streaming services. But there's something just, it's fun and it's convenient to watch something in your house, and I agree with the argument where many people say, I don't like going to theaters, I'd rather be home, I don't want to deal with strangers around, but that's a vocal minority. I mean, maybe not a minority, it's a fair amount of people, but they're a vocal one. The theater lovers are also just as strong, and I think will keep things supported.
But I think one of the big things, at least with HBO Max, that I've realized is they had Wonder Woman at the same time they released in theaters, but it was gone from HBO Max within a month. And so I think a little bit we noticed a pickup of people that even came out to the theaters after that month was over, where they were not able to watch it on HBO Max anymore. This was once again the only place to come see the movie. And so, I mean, they're just trying to do what is best for them, and that's all that they can be asked to do. And we're trying to do what's best for us, and it kind of screws us over a little bit. Like, it's not, I think the only saving grace for us with Wonder Woman coming out on Christmas was that they had canceled their free subscriptions, their free weekly trial for that movie to come out. Because at that point, we're having to compete with free, and I don't care how big your screen is, how awesome your sound system is, your 4K laser projection is, you can't compete with free. Free and the convenience of being at home with your family on Christmas.
I don't know, it's funny, I live in Hollywood, and there's less people go to the movies here than I've experienced in a long time in other places. You know what I mean? I have a small house in New Zealand in a very small village that's only about, 3,000 people, and there's a free screen cinema there that a lot of people attend. It's more well attended than a lot of cinemas here, you know what I mean? So it's like, it's the streamer culture and the streamer society and the streamer expectation of, when people used to watch one film a week, or maybe two, I seem to remember the conversations being more interesting about those one or two films they watched a week rather than the 16 hours of television they've watched this weekend. I don't know about that. It's I think less is more.
I don't think people are going to stop wanting to have the experience of going to the movies, because there's something about watching something in a group that you can't replace by watching something at home. It's the same with live events, live concerts, and live theaters. I would say that the movie theaters are more in that realm. If you want to have an experience of watching, the new release of a new movie and you're surrounded by other people, I think people will love that experience. What I like about the streaming services as a performer is that there's so much demand for content that I think we're extremely busy all of a sudden. It's just they just need to create content. They need to get those films made, and they'll go wherever they can to shoot these things. We're just about to have a big state-of-the-art sound studio built here in Manitoba. So I think they're really pushing to have more and more films come here. We're training more people. We've, in the past, we've been a little bit of a small player in the film industry in Canada, but now we're getting up there, becoming a larger player. So I don't know. The streaming services are good for us, for the industry, I think. I mean, as a consumer of product, as a consumer of film, of course we want to have access. We want to have access to them. We don't want to be denied seeing these things. So I can't really speak to the production aspect of it and how it affects that. But as a consumer, I think it's great to have the releases at home.
And that just changes their economics. So they say, well, we don't have to make $700 million in ticket sales. We get these people subscribing to our service, and we'll get them every month for this amount of money, whether they see anything or not. And so it's just a different business model.
It is a permanent thing. And what happens is, like, the industry evolves, right? If you there were some interesting articles that came out during the pandemic about what the 1918 pandemic did to the movie theater experience. And it actually changed it radically, right? Because what happened was, in 1918, a lot of the movie theaters were individually owned, right? There were mom and pop operations in local towns, this, that, and the other. And then during the pandemic, there wasn't the level of kind of government subsidies and spending we have now. A lot of those movie theaters went out of business. So there was a consolidation on the burgeoning studio side at the time to buy up the theaters as a means of distributing product, right? So it became a game changer in terms of how because now they had say over how many theaters a Charlie Chaplin movie went to, or this movie went to, however they wanted it, however it was done. So that pandemic changed the movie going and the theatrical experience forever, right? This pandemic is going to do the same. And in a lot of ways, what's happened is, I do believe that the change was coming about a little bit more slowly, but the pandemic, in all things digital, has sped up the evolution of society 10 years, whether it be telemedicine, how people conduct insurance, how people communicate over things like, Zoom and Skype, this type of thing. In the same way, the theatrical experience was sped up. The idea of how streaming has taken over has been sped up. We were going there because the new generation of kids who are like, teens and tweens have been watching things on their phone, on their iPad, as Netflix has been growing and needing to create original content. It was just amazing to me that all the studios, as sometimes they tend to be, were a little late to the game.
The video store remains beloved long after its demise. Although not economically feasible in a world of streaming, people do miss these stores dearly. Could the physical space of movie theaters face the same fate?
Going to a Blockbuster was in a way like going to the library and looking for a book. You're looking for a movie. You're perusing, the action adventure and horror, or you're talking to the person behind the counter, or you're seeing the staff picks. So unfortunately, in the digital realm that we're going, there is a lot of personal interplay that is just being lost because people are finding it easier to do things in the digital realm, and going to the video store and snooping around is one of those things, and it's interesting because as efficient as Netflix wants itself to be in lots of ways, so many people just say, like, I can't deal with trying to find something or figure out what's new or this, that, or the other. It's still in its own way. It hasn't perfected the way of looking at titles in a Blockbuster.
That's such an experience, is going and talking with talking with the guy who has all of them and who's seen everything, and like, what, should I see? You know what I usually rent. Like, what else should I get? Like, you can't beat one-to-one, face-to-face.
I shouldn't say before the internet, but before internet figured its shit out and had before streaming was even possible, like, video store was it was super convenient. If your options were hope that one day it shows up on network television at some hour where you happen to be available to watch it, or you want to pay tons of money for a cable service, and even still I remember, it's crazy, some people still even have these systems, but I remember like having to scroll through and that movie's going to play at so-so time, I guess I could record it to my DVR. A store that I could reliably walk into, maybe didn't have exactly what I wanted to watch that night, but they probably had something in stock that would be fun, and it's somewhat reliable, it's on my way home from the store. Like, that was convenient, and that's why that worked, and that's why it was a model, and like they positioned those stores close to other places you were going to, and so it wasn't a big deal to stop by. Like, in a lot of ways that was far more convenient than waiting for something to show up on network television. Like, that made a lot of sense, and so it's tough to be like, the nostalgia of it. Streaming is just the continuation of that same idea. It's just better.
I don't know about made it better, but it's changed it. Again, it was a communal thing. I remember walking through Blockbuster for hours with my friends, discussing things about movies they would probably never rent.
I suppose there's even an algorithm in the video store, like, well, they're watching what genres people are renting, what titles, what actors. There's computers behind that as well. I can actually remember it being at, it was probably a Blockbuster or something like that when Titanic was released on DVD, and it was a wall full of copies. Like, they were like, they just knew, or whatever, I don't know what kind of deal they made. They're just like, we're gonna need 100 copies in every store or more because it's gonna be such a massive release. So there's smart people behind that as well, and they are subtly, or not so subtly, steering what people are going to watch, because they're going to be like, well, there's 100 copies of this, you should watch it because we paid a lot of money for this. So they were already kind of making suggestions for us of what we should watch, and now Netflix has so much more power because they can be like, will you stop that movie about 30 minutes in? Why is that? Let's plug that into the computer and be like, this movie doesn't actually fit our model of what is a successful film on Netflix now, so, we're going to stop making movies like that, or stop streaming content that has XYZ happening at minute 32. So, I think that it's just getting smarter. Whether that means that we're all heading towards some sort of media utopia, probably not.
What sticks out to me is that, it was education. I would go to the indie section, and what I read now on IndieWire or what I find when I'm Googling. But back then, that's how I would learn about, new directors and actors that I knew that were in really fringe shit that I wouldn't have known about. It was through physically taking DVDs off the shelf and looking at them, and that was really exciting. And it almost seems like a relic now. It's wild. But do I miss that if pressed to think about it? Yeah, sure.
I think it's a different communal experience, and I think we need to in some ways, that whole video store experience has been replaced with having commenters on YouTube that you like and saying, they tell me to go watch this movie. If Amanda the Jedi says it needs to go see Jennifer's Body, I need to go find where I can watch Jennifer's Body. Let's go check it out. I think that's changed, but it's still all about community. I don't see it working any other way anymore. I think we're so disconnected. Probably your replacement for theaters and video stores has got to be something like online chats with your friends where you all watch the movie at the same time. Something of that nature, because people are so separated.
I was working at the Family Video here when they closed down. They were hanging on. I don't think I got that when I first got there. I was pretty excited to work at a video store. Completely, it did not pay the bills or anything, but at the time, coming out of the pandemic, it was one of the few jobs I could get that worked with my schedule, and with my kid. So and I was pumped, I thought it was really cool. But when I got there, I kind of realized like how much they were hanging on. They were very focused on pushing all the deals that they could, as opposed to new releases. It was whenever they started the whole Save the Video Store campaign that everyone that I worked with was kind of like, oh, okay. Like at that point too, I think we knew that I don't think we thought that was going to do anything. But I mean, that was the corporations. It was admirable. It was. I think that I'm afraid that's happening right now, if I'm being honest with you. I mean, the video store was one thing, but I think even I went to the video store a lot when I was a little kid. I mean, I still went growing up, for like dates and stuff. But whenever I started like leaving the house and like having friends that wanted to go out and do stuff that wasn't like going to the park, all we did was go to the movies. Like that's all we did. And then I'd say in the last few years, it's just completely changed. And even before that, I mean, the prices were going up. I found myself just going for like big movies, like Marvel movies, just because of the cost. No, I'd say it really, I don't know anyone who goes to the movies anymore.
Streaming evolved from movie stores. It's pretty much the same experience, right? You go into your app, you pick out the movie you want, you make some popcorn at home if you want to. Theaters, I just see as a different thing. It's been around a lot longer. It wasn't born out of the 90s where all of a sudden we had all these videos to choose from, and that just moved to an online subscription. Theater's been around for, over a century now. People have been going to the movies to see their shows. I think if streaming was going to beat out theaters, VHS would have been a lot more competition too.
You really hope not, but yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of parallels there. When I was a kid, we weren't in a big enough town to have a Blockbuster. We had like a family-owned video store, and one of my favorite things to do as a kid was obviously to go to the video store. I think the biggest issue with Blockbuster and any general video store was they weren't able to adapt, and maybe that streaming services and movies and just the way things were released and TV shows even getting bigger budgets, I think maybe there was no way they could adapt enough to make it matter. But I think movie theaters can adapt. A lot of places, like Alamo Drafthouse, who just, I think, filed for bankruptcy for a lot of their places. They have the option, they bring your meal right into your theater. We have our nice giant screen, which attracts a lot of people for, our documentaries that have, which have been a saving grace. If we didn't have these documentaries that a lot of people were willing to come see, there's no new movies, but you see these cool visuals on this giant screen. And so I don't know, I think, like I said, there's a lot of parallels, but I think movie theaters have more ability to adapt and change with this changing movie releasing environment. Whereas, with the video stores, I think, Netflix back in the days where you sent off in the mail to get these movies and they sent you a physical DVD of whatever it was that you were watching. And then you send it back and they would send you a new one back when, that was Netflix as it first came out. And Redbox was a big thing because you go to Walmart or CVS, Walgreens, and you just have to go to the front of the store and there's a little box and you don't have to interact with any people, which a lot of people are uncomfortable with. And so you just interact with the screen and you pick what movie you want, you get it, and it costs $1. It was impossible for video stores, I think, to compete with that. But I think movie theaters have the capabilities with all this stuff that are coming out that we've already been doing to entice people to come out to movies, because I think that even before COVID, I think movies were struggling a little bit. And I think as long as theaters are willing to adapt and take risk on new things, we can continue to be successful.
But that's, I guess, optimistic maybe.
Christopher Nolan is arguably the biggest director in Hollywood now, and his films are always anticipated. But during a crisis like this, it seemed like a savior.
Yes, I think Tenet was not a very good barometer for will theaters survive, because it was way too early in the process to test this, way too early in the pandemic to test this.
I think it might have been a lose-lose situation for trying to release the movie because, you know, we were still in the grips of the pandemic. It was getting worse and worse because things were starting to open up. So obviously we're going to get more and more cases of COVID.
I think it was short-sighted to think that a movie would get people to forget a worldwide pandemic and start gathering in the theaters again. So
stop blaming Chris Nolan. Stop asking Chris Nolan why. He's the worst person to ask for because he's the most polarized kind of filmmaker. He's breathing the most rarefied oxygen of any filmmaker these days.
I think they were just trying and hoping that something might work, and obviously it didn't work really well. I think it performed just about as well as just about every subsequent movie has, you know, opening weekend. It seems that every movie does about $3 million opening weekend, and that's the top movie of the week. You know, they tell, oh, this is the biggest movie in the world right now. And I'm like, well, yeah, it is, because it made $3.1 million instead of $2.9 million that the next best movie got.
It didn't hold as strong as I had hoped it would. I heard a lot of people say they didn't understand it.
But, you know, you don't realize how niche your preferences are until you get to see everyone come in. So it's definitely, you know, not everything can be Forrest Gump, just universally loved by every single person in the world. But those things that you think are going to be so amazing, and they are for you. And it's great that, you know, I got to see it in theaters, but it's definitely not everyone's cup of tea. Tenet's kind of like that. It's a movie for movie lovers. It's the IMAX experience. It was made with the design of an IMAX theater in mind. So
the needs of protecting people and public safety sort of trumped the theatrical experience in that case. It has nothing to do with the movie itself, and hoping that a movie was so good that people would forget all their safety concerns and gather together doesn't strike me as very rational. So I think it's just a bad year to try to release that film. It's just luck, you know.
It just had a bad slot of falling in the worst year in modern memory.
At the time, it was a little early still in the pandemic experience, and, you know, Christopher Nolan did everything he could in the wise way because he wants us to hold on to the theater-going experience, and it was very important for him to make sure that movie came out while everyone else kind of moved their tentpole movies off of the 2020 slate. And I admire him for doing so. And I think it was very important in what he did because it's kept the conversation going, you know. But I think it's going to be these movies that cater towards the teenage sect and the early 20s sect, and some of these other tentpoles that start to roll out that slowly but surely will start to beef up the box office numbers.
And I also just think it wasn't the correct movie to do it. I understand Christopher Nolan is a very talented filmmaker, and he's one of the best blockbuster filmmakers.
I think that was pretty pretentious. I mean, that's a big call, you know, and it's banging your own drum pretty heavily to say my shit's going to save the world, you know. And look, it isn't. His filmmaking is great, but it's not super. It's not world-bending, genre-defying, very important stuff. It's great entertainment.
I don't feel like he's a brand name people make him out to be. He definitely has a following, but I wouldn't even say he's as much of a, you know, some of these directors, like, they're basically brands, you know, like a Quentin Tarantino movie is a Quentin Tarantino movie. It's a brand. He's not that universal draw where you're going to get all demographics looking to go out to see a movie, so you really get that universal testing point, you know. Getting back to it, like you really just have to go not as intelligent, so to speak. And I love Marvel movies, but like they're not, you know, the most artistic films out there. I would go with something like that if they really wanted to test the waters, you know. Go with something where you're going to pull in multiple demographics from men, women, you know, adults and children, and a huge film for a huge proven franchise, see if that brings people in.
If, you know, the fact that if it was, you know, a much more, I want to say, palatable movie for more people to understand, you know, if it was just your mindless superhero movie where a good guy has to overcome adversity and defeat the bad guy, as, you know, to where it's a Christopher Nolan movie where you have to sit and think and almost actively participate throughout the movie.
half of the marketing was, what's this movie about? You know, like, it's a mystery. Come find out what it's about. And that's difficult marketing to pull off in the middle of a time when people are afraid to go to theaters.
People aren't going to come out to see it just on the sheer fact that they're scared of what might happen, and that's a very justifiable thing. And the other thing is, we have to reduce capacity to make sure that the people who are coming out do feel safe. And so, our capacity was limited by about a third. And so, we could fit at max 100 and, a little bit of people in a theater that can fit 350. And so, there was no way that it was going to do well. You have to put effort into watching the movie, which a lot of people don't like. I personally enjoy that. I love all, most of the Christopher Nolan movies that I've seen. They're all really good, and sometimes you want to have that kind of active engagement in your movies. Sometimes you just want to sit there and just be able to not think and just sit and enjoy. Like, I don't want to be mean or throw anyone under the water, but like the new Godzilla vs. Kong movie, I'm sure there's not going to be a whole lot of thinking to it. It's going to be two giant CGI monsters that are fighting it out, and it's going to look super awesome. And so, a lot of times that's what people want. So maybe if that movie had come out at that time, maybe it would have done better. But I think there's just a lot of factors, and I think they were, trying to hope for the best and try to maybe, hey, let's do something nice. Let's give theaters something that might get people to come out, because, we were all struggling. The few theaters that were open, we're struggling to keep open. And like I said, thankfully we were able to have, those older movies that we were able to bring back, and kind of show them intermittently. As we were getting a new movie, we would still show the older movies that people could come back, and those 80s movies that parents could now bring their kids and say, hey, this is what I watched in the theater when I was a kid, and I want to show you and bring you into that and let you experience that with me. So yeah, the whole thing was just hard. I just don't know if there was a way for them to win there, and it's a shame, because I thought it was a really good movie, and I think otherwise it would have done really well.
But could just one movie ever really bring back theaters?
I think Top Gun's doing that, huh? Top Gun, it's funny because we reopened this place, and I was going through old stuff, and I found posters of Top Gun released July 2020. So I put one up on the wall because I knew 2 weeks after we opened, we're going to be showing Top Gun. That wasn't released because of COVID until 2022. But its first release date was July in 2020. So we have posters from when we closed of Top Gun, and it's the movie we opened with. And then we sell out for 2 weeks with it. The IMAX sells out for 2 weeks, And Tom Cruise went on to say, they asked him about streaming services, and he said, I make movies for the big screen. Just like, it's silly, but man, yeah, Top Gun's been crazy for sure.
Because Tom Cruise was so dedicated to making this movie something special, that caused it to be shot the way it was, to take the risk it took, to really, there's something that Tom Cruise does to get people out to the theater that is very much like, hey, look at me, I've put my life on the line to bring you entertainment. So you've got that aspect that is a huge draw to people, and then you've got them holding it off and telling you that they're not going to stream it, and then also the spectacle and the hope of what this second one could be versus the original. So you kind of had a triple threat, that you've got 3 chances for this thing to really hit, and it kind of hit all 3 and did what it did, and I think it's no surprise, because it's hard to beat passionate filmmaking. Tons of examples, and Top Gun being one of those. I think the people who were making it were so dedicated to bringing art to the screen, even though it's like entertainment, obviously, but there's a lot of artistry in what they did, and people recognize that, whether they know it or not. And a lot of people don't know it. A lot of people don't like art, but they love movies, and they love their mascots at their football games. They just don't realize that it's artistic people that bring this, to them.
I don't know. To say that it's over, who knows, man? That's kind of one of the things that we've learned throughout all this. Big picture, we're super duper optimistic, feeling better and more solvent than we have in a long time. And I think that the thing that re-energized us as an organization, I think the industry generally, has been Top Gun Maverick. just further reinforced to us that when the studios create content that people want to see and release it theatrically, people will show up. And that movie for us was incredible, for everybody. It was incredible.
So we are a family-owned and operated movie theater company.
Awesome. Way to go.
So I'm going to try,
guys, B&B, let's go.
Try not to get emotional here, but thank you for decades of incredible filmmaking, specifically for Top Gun Maverick, man. That movie means so much to our livelihoods.
What does the theater experience mean to you? Think of your memories at the movie theater. Can you get what you love from movies at home? Is theatrical exhibition really essential?
Watching Return of the Jedi in the theater, getting in line to go see it, watching it with my brother and my family, and knowing that so many other people were watching this movie, and that's an amazing story. I'm surrounded by Star Wars props. I can reach behind me. That's Darth Vader's lightsaber, because I love props and I love Star Wars. So it was definitely formative. That's something that made me want to be involved in the art part of movies, because everything was so intricate and well made for those movies. So that was a big one, definitely.
You know, early James Bond, sneaking into James Bond movies and Star Wars movies, and those sort of. I remember very clearly there was a Disney theater. I lived in Switzerland, grew up in Switzerland, and there was a Disney theater that played Disney movies all every Saturday matinees. That was a very clear memory.
It was Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. When I was a kid, we had a $1 movie theater called the Rialto in a town about 10 minutes away from me. And we went to see that. Old wooden seats, not comfortable at all, but like completely engrossed in this film and this action adventure. And I can remember when like they're having the tank fight and Harrison Ford is stuck on the gun, and just how heightened a world that was for me, especially as like a little kid. So I would say Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade was something that instilled that like sense of like awe and wonder about like, how do you do this? How do you make a movie like this? How do you make people feel this way? So that was it.
I'm in my early 50s now, so I am a child of, Star Wars and Jaws and all of those initial blockbusters, the original blockbusters, summer blockbusters. So for me, one of the most vivid memories I have is, when Empire Strikes Back came out, and I grew up in New York City. So there were, and back in those days, in the late 70s and early 80s, before the advent of the 24 and the 12 plex, it was literally, movie theaters were one screen, maybe two. And in the one screen event, so the local movie theater near me was probably in excess of 2,000 seats, right? Like that's how, the old school movie theaters were before they started to get chopped up. And I'll never forget going. Obviously, Empire Strikes Back was a seminal event coming on the heels of Star Wars. It was like the first time that there was like a, sequel in the blockbuster era. And I remember going on the first day it opened up on Friday with everybody else in the world, and not going to school that day, and going for the first showing at 12 o'clock, which was absolutely packed. And then literally after seeing it the first time and being amazed, one of my friends I was with, who was like, well, let's figure out, let's stay and see it again. And back in those days, it wasn't, since I guess it had never really been done before, that there was such a craziness about people going to see it. There wasn't like a system in place where they would come and kick everybody out before the next group of people came in. So we literally just sat in our seats and watched the movie again. And then when it was over, we watched it again. Like the theater was like, okay, we can sell 2,000 seats. That's how many we have. But then from one showing to the next one, you've got like 100 or 200 people or 300 people staying for the next show, and you sell out 2,000 seats. Invariably what happens is people are standing and watching the movie because there's no seats, right? Because people from before stayed and took the seats. So I think I stayed there, and I think I probably got punished for it because those are days before cell phone. Your parents had no idea where you were. Probably stayed there and watched every show till about the 10 p.m. show. And as the shows got later and later and more people stayed, it was absolute standing room only by the time like the 8 o'clock show happened. And I think I'll never forget that, because that was just like the ultimate sense of communal group experience.
One experience that's really strong in my mind, Bad Education, La Mala Educación. I went to see that at AMC Lowe's in Chelsea. A huge, I think it's still there, like on 23rd, between 7th and 8th, I think. And it was so good. It transfixed me so much that after it was done, I didn't cheat the theater. I went downstairs and I got another ticket, and I went to see it right after. And it's one of his longer ones. So I ended up being in like the Almodovarian world for almost 6 hours that day. I remember leaving the theater after the first screening and just kind of walking around on their mezzanine level, and I was just like, yeah, I'm not ready to go into the world again. I need to stay in that world. I was so affected by the relationships, by the emotional tenacity. I mean, just everything he does with humanity is so beautiful and painful, and no one does it like him. And I was really affected by the love story, and so there was a feeling of needing. It wasn't a want, it was a need. I needed to live in the world of that film for that day, and I was not ready to go back into the world that was not the world that Almodovar created. There's a sexy anonymity to the theater going experience. You are at once completely individualized, your body, you have your chair and you're there, but there's this awareness of these other bodies around you that also have conceptual thinking minds, that are also imbibing and analyzing and reflecting and feeling. I remember when I went to see, so Joker was a recent obsession in recent years. I saw it 3 times in the theater, was obsessed with that stair dance as millions of people. The fuck you of that dance and the beauty that he brought, it was so moving and just made me feel so empowered. And I remember I took a friend, another cinephile friend who's also a playwright, I took her to see Joker, and I remember when that scene was starting, I was feeling the energy off her body, and I think from her lips escaped, oh my God, and it was so cool to feel that she was shaken just like I was. So there is something to say about the bigness, the physical bigness, amplifying the hell out of the narrative, and moments that in particular have crescendos, like that scene.
When I was 14, I went on a double date with this kid Tyler and these 2 girls we met at a church lock-in. We went to go see One Missed Call, and they sold us tickets, but even though they sold us tickets, when we got in there were no seats. I don't know what was going on, but it was packed, and Juno was showing right across the aisle, the hall. I don't know. I'd say that's probably the only time I've ever really broken the rules in a movie theater. Still paid for a ticket, but I ended up going to see a different movie, and I hadn't really heard anything about Juno, and it just completely it's not the movie we went to go see, and it ended up kind of defining my personality for a few months in high school. I did not know movies could be written like that, or soundtracks could be compiled like that,
I guess when I was just in high school, starting to go out with friends a lot, breaking away from parents and kind of having more of the friend experience, and what can you do at that age? Mostly is go see a movie. And at the time, there were franchises that I loved, like even Scream. I have a movie poster somewhere up there for Scream. And I remember it was at the height of the franchise at that point, and Scream 2 was coming out, and it was like, better see it quick before the ending is ruined for you. And so go to like a midnight screening at the time, and everybody had that energy, that buzz of wanting to see it first, and just being young and experiencing that and trying to get to that story first before other people was just such a fun, exciting time. And even other films later on down the line, like superhero films, even some of the early X-Men movies. I remember going to see X-Men 2, and people would come up dressed as the characters, and people were kind of cosplaying at the movie theater, just kind of turned the basic movie-going experience into something more, where they were coming in character, showing off their own little art during it. Yeah, all those kind of things, like kind of my high school years of just really stepping out away, from the family and with friends, and kind of like, oh, this is an area we can go to. This is a place that is ours.
And so I don't know if there was one theater experience. I have a ton of just different theater experiences that made me love going to the theater, whether they were good or bad. Lord of the Rings is probably my favorite set of movies, and I was really upset I was just a little bit too young to realize that they were even out there to go enjoy them in the theater. And so, once I had bought the Lord of the Rings movies on VHS back in the day, it was right before DVDs were as big as they were. But then The Hobbit came out, and I got it in college. I was able to go see The Hobbit, and I went to the midnight showing of the first Hobbit movie in Columbia when I had a 7:30 final the next morning. The issue is I had to leave early because I felt really sick all of a sudden in the middle of The Hobbit, so I felt sick. I managed to drive myself home. I woke up to take a 7:30 final the next morning, and then right after that I went and watched the rest of the movie in the theater again. So I don't know if there's really one specific thing that made me love it. I think I've always just loved movies, and working here has helped a lot. I think one of my favorite things of working here is, I don't know if I need to make spoiler alerts for a movie that's several years old at this point, but when Ant-Man and the Wasp came out, and there's that post-credit scene where you realize that everybody just been snapped by Thanos, I loved going in the theater as that was happening, just watching everybody like audibly gasp and freak out, realizing what had happened at that point. And so it's just always been a big thing that I've always really enjoyed doing. Like we've done in the past year, we'd have free kids movies in the summer. I remember going to those as a kid in my own theater. We showed, I think, Shrek, if I remember right, when I was a little kid. And me and my best friend went and watched Shrek. Even though, once again, I had the VHS at home, I'd watch it a billion different times, but it was on the big screen, and so I wanted to watch Shrek again. So like I said, I think it was just a bunch of different things added all in. I don't know, maybe I was just born to like movies. It's just always something that I've enjoyed doing and going to the theater and experiencing, so...
Yeah, so actually at this theater. So I grew up in Eureka Springs, and I would stay with my aunt a week out of the year in Branson and do all the Branson stuff. And she'd take one kid at a time because there was 4 of us. She couldn't handle all 4 of us. So we all spent a week here. And she said I was the easiest because she just dropped me off at the movies. I always wanted to go to the movies. And I watched Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban here. And I'd watched the first 2 movies and I was like, whatever. And this third movie, different director, totally different movie. I watched that. And then I read 3 of the books before I went home because I was just obsessed. And I'll never forget, that was at this movie theater. I was so excited that when we opened this, I was like, hey, I'm working where I fell in love with movies, It's an experience, right? So like at home, it's all about comfort. Most people build their house to be comfortable to them. Just like, I guess, watching a movie at a friend's house is an experience. You're getting out. Me and my fiance, we go to the movies. First thing we walk in, you smell the popcorn. Even though I work here every day, when I come in on my days off and the popcorn machine's going, it just, wow, this place smells great, And then picking out a candy, getting your sodas, getting in there, picking out your favorite seat. Your favorite seat's open. You're like, oh, yes, It's these little things that just keep adding to the experience. And then it's a great movie, and someone starts clapping at the end, and the whole crowd claps. Or someone says a joke in the movie that's so funny, and the whole crowd starts laughing. And it's almost like, especially in like our, these theaters are pretty intimate. Our theaters are pretty small, like 200 seats, our biggest, I think. So it feels like you're enjoying it with all these people. Even though you guys don't know each other, you guys know you came here to watch Nicolas Cage play Nick Cage, and that's pretty cool, you know?
As far as streaming goes, that's been such an interesting thing to see continue to evolve and develop. I don't know that there was ever a time that we, speaking specifically about B&B, were really worried about it. There's a lot of press about, is this the end of cinema, whatever. That happened when home video was a thing, like VHS. That happened with the advent of DVDs. So we're accustomed to disruption, but it's an excuse for us to continue to innovate and give people a reason to come to the theaters. But what was so interesting about the pandemic and the subsequent kind of push when they put content direct to streaming was that it forced a case study that nobody ever really wanted to try out. But the studios essentially learned that the only way they could recoup the investment in these films was with a theatrical window.
There is something different about the movies. There's something different about the movie theater. It's magic, right?
More than 3 years after the shutdown, it would seem that theaters have survived their existential crisis. But the future is not certain. If you love movie theaters, it's up to you to support them. As the traditional theatrical window becomes a thing of the past, you have more choice now than ever before. Your dollar is the only thing that can truly save the theaters.